I never imagined a broken heater could ruin my night so beautifully. When the coffee shop's old radiator coughed its last, I was stuck inside with him, the guy I had been stalking in my daydreams like a hopeless idiot. His name was Eli, the mysterious bookstore guy with a voice that could melt ice and a stare that made my heart trip over itself. I had been coming here every Tuesday, pretending I just loved lattes, just to see him flip pages, run his fingers along book spines, and occasionally glance at me like he suspected something. Tonight, Fader Bad Plumbing had thrown us together in a tiny, warm room surrounded by the scent of espresso and old paper. "You didn't bring a jacket?" he asked, a teasing note threading through his words. He had that way of speaking that made it sound like he was laughing and scolding at the same time. "I didn't expect the heater to die," I mumbled, rubbing my arms. My voice sounded smaller than usual, like the coffee shop had swallowed my confidence whole. Eli leaned back, crossing one leg over the other, eyes glinting. "Seems like you'll have to survive the night next to me then." I choked on my own heartbeat. The words weren't threatening, but the warmth in his gaze could start fires. I wanted to tell him how long I'd been fantasizing about just this, the idea of being stuck with him, even if it meant shivering a little. But my mouth decided it preferred silence, which probably made me look like a pathetic mess. "Not like I mind," he added with a soft chuckle. That laugh, the one I'd memorized, wrapped around me tighter than any blanket could. The night dragged its fingers across the hours. Outside, the city hummed faintly, streetlights winking in and out of the foggy night. Inside we sat, two strangers caught in a strange, quiet intimacy. The coffee shop, once bustling, now felt like our private universe. "So, you really love books that much?" I asked finally, desperate to keep talking, desperate to not let the silence crush me. "I do," he said, eyes dropping to a leather-bound tome in front of him. "There's a magic in books, in discovering someone else's thoughts, their heart, without them even knowing you're reading." His voice softened, almost a whisper, and I couldn't help but imagine him reading my soul instead of the page. "You make it sound enchanting," I admitted. Eli tilted his head, studying me as if deciding whether I was worthy of his honesty. Then, in a move that was casual but not, he reached across the table and brushed his fingers against mine. The contact was electric. My chest hitched, and my lips betrayed me with a small, unintentional gasp. "I like when someone notices the magic in small things," he said, his voice low, smooth, and intimate, making my brain short-circuit. "Even a dying heater can be poetic." I wanted to laugh, but it came out as a strangled chuckle, my face heating up like the coffee I was barely holding. He smiled faintly, that mysterious half-smile that made me feel like the whole world had shrunk to just us. Hours passed without us noticing. We talked about trivial things, favorite authors, worst movie endings, the absurdity of life in general, but every word felt weighted, loaded with something unsaid. The kind of unsaid that makes your stomach twist and your throat tight because, in some way, hearts are quietly colliding. At some point, Eli leaned forward. "Do you ever feel like some nights are meant to change everything?" he murmured, fingers tracing idle patterns on the table. I swallowed hard. How do you answer a question like that when your entire body is already screaming yes, and your mind is filled with every daydream you've ever had about him? "Maybe," I whispered. His eyes softened, and he closed the small distance between us, enough that I could see the flecks of green in his irises, enough that I could smell the faint hint of cedar in his hair. My heart pounded, and I could feel the heat from him brushing my arm. It was intimate, too intimate, and yet I didn't want him to pull away. "You're warm," he said, almost to himself, though he kept his eyes on me. "Better than any heater." I laughed nervously, and he joined in, our laughter overlapping, mingling with the soft hum of the city outside. I wanted to tell him everything, how I had watched him from afar, how I had imagined nights like this, but I stayed quiet, letting the words hang in the air, heavy with meaning. Then, without warning, his hand found mine again, fingers intertwining, and my chest did that ridiculous leap that I knew I'd never get used to. "You feel right?" he said simply, as if he had been waiting for this night as long as I had. My cheeks burned. I think you do too, I managed. Eli's grin was soft, teasing, but there was a seriousness in his gaze that stole my breath. Good, because I don't want this night to end. We sat like that, hands together, words fading into silence, comforted by the simple touch, the soft presence of someone who had somehow become everything I didn't know I needed. Outside, the city moved on, oblivious to the tiny universe we had created in the corner of a dying coffee shop. Eventually, the heater sputtered back to life, a weak but steady warmth spreading across the room. Eli's hand stayed in mine, unwavering, and I realized I didn't care about the cold anymore. Not when this warmth existed. He tilted his head, eyes glinting with that unspoken challenge, and whispered, "So, are you coming to the bookstore tomorrow?" I smiled, heart hammering. Wouldn't miss it for the world. For the first time, maybe ever, I didn't feel like a hopeless dreamer. I felt like someone who had just touched a small, perfect piece of magic, and somehow, it was real. Hours melted into moments. Coffee grew cold, books lay open, forgotten. We whispered jokes, secrets, confessions, and for the first time I wasn't pretending to be anyone else. "Promise me something?" Eli asked suddenly, his voice a low, serious drawl. "What?" "Promise me. No matter what, we'll remember this night. Just the two of us. And maybe, we'll let it be the start of something." I squeezed his hand, heart full, and nodded. "I promise." He smiled, that slow, knowing smile that made me melt every single time. And in that dim, quiet corner of the coffee shop, with the heater humming weakly, the world outside could have burned and I wouldn't have cared. Because for once, in all my wandering heartbeats and stolen glances, I was exactly where I belonged. The morning light seeped through the coffee shop windows, soft and almost golden, making everything look calmer than the whirlwind of emotions from last night. I blinked against it, slowly realizing that Eli's hand was still in mine. Somehow, sleep had found us amidst whispered confessions, awkward laughter, and the constant hum of electricity in the air. "I'm awake," I murmured, my voice scratchy. He stirred, dark hair falling slightly over his forehead, eyes still half-lidded but glowing with a warmth that made my chest tighten. "Good," he said, his voice teasing yet gentle. "You looked peaceful." I laughed softly, brushing my fingers against his. "I was peaceful because I was next to you. Don't let it get to your head." He smirked, but the way his eyes softened when they met mine made me think he had already claimed at least part of my heart. "Too late," he whispered, and I could feel the teasing warmth in his tone reach straight into my bones. We finally decided to leave the coffee shop once the morning crowd started drifting in. The heater had finally been fixed, but we didn't even notice the chill outside, too absorbed in the small, casual intimacy we had cultivated overnight. Walking together on the quiet streets of the city, hands still lightly touching, I realized how strange and beautiful it felt to not be pretending, to let someone in without fear. "So, the bookstore," I said, breaking the comfortable silence. "Tomorrow." Eli grinned, that mysterious half-smile I had memorized. "Tomorrow, and maybe the next day if you behave." "I behave all the time," I said, trying not to blush. "Sure," he said, raising an eyebrow, voice dripping with playful disbelief. "All the time." We laughed together, the kind of laughter that makes the city feel smaller, safer, and more like it's ours alone. For the first time, I didn't feel like the awkward, invisible guy who haunted a coffee shop in secret. I felt like someone who had been seen, truly seen, by a soul that matched mine in ways words couldn't capture. The next day, I arrived at the bookstore early, heart thundering with anticipation. Eli was there, perched behind the counter, reading, fingers lightly drumming on the cover of an old novel. When he looked up and saw me, his grin was enough to make the entire store glow. "You came," he said simply. No teasing, no games, just a warmth that made my knees weak. "I wouldn't miss it," I said, stepping closer, careful not to trip over my own nerves. He gestured toward the back of the store. Let me show you something. We wandered past towering shelves filled with books, the air scented with paper and ink, quiet except for our soft footsteps. Eventually, he stopped in a corner that seemed almost like a hidden sanctuary, a small nook filled with rare books and little curiosities. This is amazing, I breathed, taking it all in. I could get lost here forever. Eli's eyes softened. I wanted to share it with someone who would understand. He reached for my hand again, and I didn't resist. Instead, I let myself be pulled into that small world he had created. Days turned into weeks. Every visit, every stolen glance, every lingering touch built a rhythm that felt natural, inevitable. We explored the city together, found quiet cafes and hidden parks, shared confessions about fears, dreams, and regrets. With him, vulnerability didn't feel dangerous, it felt like breathing. One evening, as the sun dipped below the skyline, painting the streets gold and pink, we sat on a bench in a quiet park. Eli leaned against me, fingers entwined with mine. Do you ever think about the future? He asked softly. All the time, I admitted. But with you, it doesn't feel scary. It feels like something I want. He smiled, resting his head against my shoulder. I feel the same. I was afraid to get close, scared of ruining what felt so perfect. But last night changed everything. I tilted my head, catching his gaze. Last night, that night in the coffee shop, he said, voice low and intimate. When we were stuck there together, I realized I didn't just want a fleeting moment with you. I wanted all the mornings, all the nights, everything in between. My chest tightened, emotion so overwhelming that tears threatened to spill. I feel the same, I whispered. We didn't need words after that. The connection between us was electric, tender, and infinitely deep. His hand in mine, our shoulders brushing, our lips occasionally meeting in soft, hesitant kisses. It was everything I had imagined, yet more real and beautiful than I could have dreamed. Life wasn't perfect, of course. Some days were mundane, some stressful, some filled with doubt. But Eli was there, constant and steady, making even the hardest days feel manageable. He became my anchor, my home, and I his. One rainy evening, while the city shimmered under wet lights, we found ourselves huddled under a small awning. My jacket was wet, my hair plastered to my forehead, and I laughed despite myself. Eli pulled me closer, arms wrapping around me like he was shielding me from more than just the rain. You're ridiculous, he said, voice warm against my ear. I know, I said, resting my head on his chest. But you love it. Maybe, he admitted with a smirk. But mostly, I love you. The words hit me with the force of everything I had ever longed for. I love you too, I whispered, feeling the weight and the freedom of it all at once. As the rain fell, we stood there, holding each other, letting the world pass by. The city's noise, the chaos, the uncertainty, it didn't matter. What mattered was this, the two of us finally undeniably together. In the weeks and months that followed, our love deepened. Coffee shop nights became rituals, bookstore visits transformed into adventures, and every small touch, glance, and whisper built a bond stronger than anything either of us had imagined. We celebrated each other's victories, comforted each other's sorrows, and laughed through countless absurd moments, holding on to the magic we had discovered in that unexpected, cold night. And then, one quiet evening, Eli took my hands in his and said, "Do you remember that night? When the heater died and we were trapped?" I nodded, smiling at the memory. Of course. How could I forget? That was the start, he said, eyes glimmering. The night that turned my life upside down in the best way possible. And I wouldn't trade it for anything. I leaned in, brushing my lips against his in a gentle, lingering kiss. Neither would I. The world outside continued in its frantic pace. But in that corner of our lives, there was only warmth, laughter, and love. We had started with shivering in a broken coffee shop, hearts full of secret longing, and ended up discovering something infinitely more precious. Each other. And in the end, that was enough. Because sometimes, the most unexpected nights strapped, cold, and utterly ordinary at first glance hold the kind of magic that can change your life forever. And for Eli, it had. We walked home together, hands entwined, hearts aligned, knowing that no matter what came next, we had found something rare, tender, and true. And as I looked at him, his dark hair glinting in the streetlights, the mischievous smile playing on his lips, I realized I wasn't just in love with him. I was home. Thank you for listening. Don't forget to like and subscribe to stay updated with the latest videos.